The last day of death row inmate. Steven Timothy Judy, the killer who laughed at death. What if the man walking to the electric chair wasn't afraid but eager? What if he asked for death, smiled at the thought, and joked in his final moments? This is not fiction. This was Steven Timothy Judy. On March the 9th, 1981, Indiana carried out one of the most unsettling executions in U.S. history, not because the crime was in doubt, but because the killer himself demanded it. Judy confessed to a crime so devastating that the state brought back the electric chair just for him. He didn't appeal. He didn't flinch. He warned the jury, "If you don't kill me, I'll kill again." But who was this man before the headlines? What led him to such violence? And in his final 24 hours, what did he say, think, and feel before facing old Betsy, Indiana's electric chair? Tonight, we walk with him step by step into the final hours of a killer who welcomed his fate. Dear friends, as the early light filtered into cell block C of Indiana State Prison on March the 9th, 1981, a chilling calm blanketed the corridor. This wasn't just another day behind bars, it was the final day of Steven Timothy Judy's life. At just 24 years old, he wasn't resisting his execution. In fact, he had asked for it. He refused appeals, rejected mercy, and welcomed the electric chair with an eerie sense of satisfaction. But how did a young man, barely into adulthood, end up here counting down the final hours to a death he had demanded? Steven Judy's journey to death row was as disturbing as it was tragic. Born into a storm of domestic violence and neglect on May the 24th, 1956, Judy's early life was chaotic. His father was frequently arrested for assaulting his mother. One day, in a fit of rage, his father killed the family dog instead of his wife. Steven's attorney would later say that his client had never known safety or love. By the time Steven was 10, he was already being harmed by the adults meant to protect him. A babysitter, entrusted with his care, repeatedly violated that trust. Rather than receiving help, Steven was blamed and punished. By age 13, the trauma had turned into violence. He impersonated a Boy Scout to gain entry into a woman's home, where he brutally attacked her. The knife he used broke, but not before he fractured her skull and severed her finger. That attack led to 6 months in juvenile detention, followed by a stint in a mental institution. Diagnosed with severe behavioral issues, Judy was transferred into foster care with Robert and Mary Carr. They didn't know about his past. They couldn't have known they were harboring a future killer. That past erupted on April the 28th, 1979. Terry Lee Chastain was driving with her 3 children when Steven Judy flagged her down, pretending to warn her about a bad tire. Seemingly helpful, he sabotaged her car and offered them a ride. Instead, he drove them to a secluded spot near White Lick Creek. There, he assaulted and strangled Terry with a belt and her own clothing. Then, in a methodical, calculated act, he threw each of her children ages 5, 4, and 2 into the creek. One by one, he drowned them. Judy showed no remorse. When caught, he admitted to everything. In court, he even pushed for the death penalty. During sentencing, he looked the judge in the eye and said, "I honestly want you to give me the death penalty, because someday I might get out." He threatened the jury, declared he would kill again, and called his own fate inevitable. On February the 2nd, 1980, he was convicted. 3 weeks later, sentenced to die. Indiana hadn't used its electric chair in 2 decades, but they brought it back for him. As the hours of March the 9th unfolded, Judy showed no panic. He woke at 5:30 a.m., calm, quiet. He didn't eat much of his breakfast. He had no appetite. His foster father came to visit. They shared few words, just quiet understanding. Judy's attorney brought him a final envelope thought to be a confession. Inside were 6 blank pages. No words, no final truth. By mid-afternoon, the ritual of death had begun. Judy was escorted to shower, shaved, and cleaned for execution. He was then moved to a small holding cell near the electric chair. There was no bed, just a bench and the passing of time. Unlike others before him, Judy greeted the final moments with grim humor. He joked with guards, called the chair Old Betsy, asked if he could bring marshmallows. His composure never cracked. At 7:00 p.m., his last meal was served. Prime rib, lobster tails, baked potato, salad, and a roll. He requested beer, but it was denied. Outside, the atmosphere was surreal. Protesters held candles in quiet vigil. Supporters of the death penalty chanted for justice. Mark Chastain, the children's father, told a crowd he'd throw the switch himself if allowed. Inside, Judy sat alone in silence. No priest, no final prayer, just fluorescent lights buzzing above him. He still joked, still defiant. At 11:55 p.m., a guard came to collect him. Judy handed his wristwatch to another inmate. A simple, human gesture in the face of death. He walked 13 steps to the chair, unshackled, head held high. Reporters weren't allowed, but guards said he was steady, almost casual. The chair was dark, polished, waiting. Judy sat down without resistance. Thick leather straps bound his arms, chest, and legs. Electrodes were attached to his scalp and ankle. A damp sponge was placed to reduce burning. Then the copper wires were connected. At 12:11 a.m., the warden gave the order. The first jolt hit hard. 2,023 volts surged through his body. His chest slammed forward. Smoke curled from beneath the skullcap. Muscles locked in violent convulsion. The smell of scorched flesh filled the chamber. Then a second wave, 500 volts for 20 seconds. His body jerked faintly, then fell still. A doctor stepped forward, checked for signs of life. At 12:12 a.m., Steven Timothy Judy was declared dead. There were no final words, no apology, no tearful goodbyes, just the end of a man who once threatened to kill again. And for many, he was true to his word until the state ended it for him. But as Indiana wiped down the electric chair and reporters filed their stories, questions lingered in the cold night air. Had justice been served, or had the system given death to a man who wanted it all along? In the end, Steven Timothy Judy didn't run, didn't beg, and didn't resist. He embraced his fate with chilling calm. His execution marked Indiana's first in 20 years, carried out not in secrecy, but under the shadow of a man who demanded it. Judy left behind no remorse, no redemption, only questions. Was this justice or a state-assisted suicide? Could anything have changed his path, or was his fate sealed by the violence that shaped his childhood? Some say he deserved exactly what he got. Others believe executing a man who welcomed death reveals more about us than him. What's certain is that his final 24 hours filled with jokes, silence, and 2,000 volts will haunt the timeline of capital punishment forever. As the chair cooled and silence returned to the prison, so did the uneasy truth. Sometimes, the people we execute are the ones who ask for it. What does that say about justice or about us?